you so much to all of you for coming. And it's truly a great honor for me to be here today talking with Ngũgĩ wa Thiong'o and his son, Mukoma. Like many people, particularly in Africa, I grew up reading Ngũgĩ's work, and I now teach his work. And so this is really, truly a great honor. And it's a great honor for me to be here with Mukoma as well. I've just begun to read his work, his novel Nairobi Heat, which is here, and I urge you to get it. It's a great, great book. And what I particularly enjoy about Mukoma's work is the diasporic element. So his work is often set in America and Africa and so forth. So I see my role today as someone who's going to throw questions out there and start a conversation between father and son. You know, maybe you'll speak one after the other, maybe you'll speak over each other, maybe you'll argue. That would be fun. And then from time to time I'll interject and maybe change the conversation a little bit. So that's how I see my role. But I thought we would begin with storytelling. I would like to ask both of you to talk to us about how and why you started to tell stories and write them.
Shall I begin, or do you want to? No, you go first. See, rivalry has started. First of all, thank you very much for the invitation. Good to see you and everybody who is here. It's wonderful to see all of you. And let me start with just how storytelling has been part of my life. It's something which I've narrated in my book, Dreams in a Time of War, when I tell how storytelling was part of the everyday in the evening. Mainly because we didn't, of course, have books or television in those days. I'm talking about the 1950s, of course, 40s, 50s. We didn't have television, we didn't have books, but storytelling in the evening was really, a huge thing. I mean, and I've written about it in Dreams in a Time of War and other places. So if I can talk about the origins for me of writing, begins, and if I can look back to where it all started, it was definitely, at home in the evening. Yeah.
So was it the same for you, Mukoma?
We had books, but we didn't have television. So, for me, when I think about storytelling, I remember, when my father was put in detention, and then later when he was sent into exile, or forced into exile. And this was a time of the Moi dictatorships. One of the ways we coped as a family was to tell stories. And they weren't really fanciful stories of either things we hope to accomplish or, more often than not. Since I was younger, how to get girls. But we had that tradition of every evening, just getting together and telling stories. And in fact, till today, I'll call up my brother, and say, when a story, like, do you have a story for me? And same thing with my father as well. That's, the way we begin our conversations. Then the other aspect is that I grew up in a family where I saw books being written. So I wanted to be able to write books as well. So that would be the origins.
So what was it like growing up as the son of a famous writer? Was it intimidating? And not just a famous writer, but a writer who'd been imprisoned and sent into exile for his writing. What was that like?
I wouldn't say it was intimidating, because I guess one of the good things about being a kid is you just grow up. And in another way I would say it was actually freeing to the extent that where else other Kenyan kids my age who dreamt of writing didn't have anything between them and that dream. We didn't have journals or creative writing classes and so on and so forth. I had the added advantage of knowing, books would be written. So in terms of me as a writer, no. On the other hand, the day's politics. For example, going to get tea and mandazi, like a cake, and hearing people talk about him, either positively or depending on the day's politics, not so positively. But that's why the evenings were very important, because then as a family we could come back and just be normal.
Yeah, well, the other thing which for me was important was, of course, in a way, the difference between him and I is that, there are, as he said, I was writing, he was aware of books. He grows up where there's a home library. I grew up where there's no home library. The books I read were the ones I borrowed from my teachers, and even then, they're rare, So it meant for me, reading the Old Testament over and over again, so my first book of stories really was the Old Testament, an old copy, which I read over and over again, And for me, the characters in the Old Testament became, I don't, not religious characters. I don't regard the Old Testament in terms of religion at all, or the New, although I like the Old Testament better than the New. Yeah. Because what happened was that when I was reading the Old Testament, all those characters, they go incredible. And even the God, by the way, even the God in the Old Testament, is more personal, because he gets very angry, he's happy, he feels more like a human being in a way. So I could recognize him better than this other one. So when I came to the New Testament, I was hoping to find similar stories, and it was really very, disappointing.
God was gentrified in the New Testament.
I don't know really, but it doesn't have the story. It's the parables, of course. The parables become something which I found very, 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 interesting. But there's another thing which is another difference. And they could talk about. They knew I wrote books. In fact, and they knew some other writers, either in person who came to our home, or like in the case of when he and the sister who follows him. When I went to prison, there was a poster in my home library with a poem by Sonia Sanchez. So they tell me that whenever he can tell us the story of Sonia Sanchez and my being in prison. But let me go back. In my book, Dreams in Time of War and the Forthcoming in the House of the Interpreter, I do talk actually how, when we thought about writing, in those days, at least for me, we thought of it in terms of something which you could not write unless you had a license to write, okay? And I remember arguing with my friend over and over again to the point of quite physical blows. With him arguing, no, you cannot be in prison even if you write. I said, no. If you write without a license and so on, you'll be in prison. We went on and on and on and on and on. And in fact, the first book written by, not published, was just by my friend who wrote a few pages to prove that you could write a novel without being imprisoned. Okay, so that's, but by the time they come to being, they have a model. They know that there are writers who are African who write. For me, my writers of those days were Dickens, Stevenson. That was my world. Yeah.
So I asked Mukoma if it was intimidating having a father such as yourself, this famous writer. And I want to ask you, I know you've just been talking, but I want to ask you, as you looked at your son writing, maybe I should ask you if you were intimidated. But
yeah, I am. I'll tell you why in a minute.
I like that question.
Were you intimidated, and or did you have anxieties about the process of getting published and so forth for your son?
No, first of all, I tried with all my kids, you know, I've got about 9, I think. Still counting.
You're not sure?
Still counting. No, the last one is here, because I can't say still counting, because it's here. Yeah. I obviously, I would like them, I mean, you know, everybody, writers, I like them to write if they want to, but I try not to pressurize them. I try not to make them feel they must become writers, you know, things like that. But what I did with all of them is encouraging them to read books, and they are all, nearly all of them, are very, very good readers, actually. Now they compete as who is the fastest, you know, to come ahead the record, I think. But I mean, there's somebody else who is challenging that record, you know. So I never tried to push them to be writers, but I've tried very much to excite their imagination, partly because I also enjoy it, actually. You know, for instance, we give one game which Thiong'o and I used to play. It's the youngest son and my daughter, who is out here. We would close our eyes, and he and I was very good at this. You know, we'd go to close our eyes, and they wanted me to fly. So I said, okay, come join me, you can fly. So when they are in the room, you know, sort of, you close your eyes, and he close his eyes, and then we see stars and other things. I mean, we could sort of almost upping each other in what we saw. We made a mistake once of including the daughter in the exercise. Mombi, she's much more down to earth. Because she was seeing these wonderful things, which told her to shut her eyes as well. And we're going on about stars and so on, and she couldn't find any. So by the time we opened our eyes, Moby was not in the room. She's gone to her mother to tell her, you know, that she thought Daddy and Thiong'o were a little bit. They said they were seeing things she could not see. Yeah. And with Mukoma, and actually the older ones, Mukoma, there's a story I used to tell them about, I call him one cowboy, you know, and I told the older ones, and they would, they would sort of open their mouth in wonder at the adventures of this character whom I had sort of made up and so on. Now, then of course later I was in prison, blah, blah, and other places. Many years later, and he can tell you, the story of Manka has become a family story I did not know. It's been elaborated into so many places. And last time, I think Mukoma was seen in Sweden by one of my other sons, who found him somewhere in a restaurant, somewhere in Gothenburg. So the character has come alive in the family. This is the kind of thing we used to do in the family. Generally.
Early with Ngũgĩ, I remember telling Thiong'o, tell him stories about Ngũgĩ, and I would get a phone call, time for Ngũgĩ. But what would happen was, when my eldest brothers would tell this story, Ngũgĩ was a rebel, in fact there used to be this song, Ngũgĩ Dage Horeka Nedigari, which means Ngũgĩ cannot be beaten by cops. And he's unbeatable, And maybe I should tell you one of the stories quickly. So one day Ngũgĩ is surrounded by cops, and they've all drawn their guns. And Ngũgĩ tells them, "Have you aimed?" And they say, "Yes, we are ready to kill him." And then he says, "Fire!" And then he ducks, and the cops kill each other. Because but what they would do is they would leave a cliffhanger. So it would be, and he told them, "Fire!" And then my other brothers would be like, "That's it. That's the end of the story." but later they confessed, because they made the stories as they told them. So sometimes they had to go and think of the next thing, yeah.
So I was going to ask you what are some of the main similarities and differences between your writing. I can see that you all have these sort of joined stories. But I do want to ask you have stories that run within your family. I want to ask you about, and maybe address this to you, Mukoma, what do you see as some of the main differences between your father's writing and your writing?
Well, for one, Nairobi Heat is a detective novel. Though Papa says that he has tried writing detective novels to his, but
that's why he's intimidated.
Yeah, exactly. But I tend to think of the differences, in more literary theory, which is, from Freud, the concept of mourning and melancholy. Where in mourning, you know exactly what you have lost. Through language, for example, Fafa knows exactly what he lost in terms of language, culture, land. If I remember, there was a time, this was around 2006, when we went back to Kenya, and you took us to Limuru, and you're saying, well, where we are standing right now, this is to be our land, right? Whereas for me, I don't have that direct. My loss, is not direct. So for me, there's a removal, and I think that sort of comes across in the way I write. I think detective fiction is great for trying to talk about that sort of melancholy, because you can have characters that are extreme. My first novel, which hasn't been published, was using a narrator, first-person narration and third-person narration, right? So for me to get to that loss that I don't know exactly what it is. I know it because I feel it, but to get to it, my approach has to be, I guess, to employ more, different narrators and so on and so forth. So I'd say that's one difference. Then the other one is something he has talked about, so I'm stealing his idea, which is that for me and our generation generally, our globalness is easy, because, for example, I was born in Illinois, grew up in Kenya, then came to the US when I was 19. So I can move sort of fluidly, across the cultures.
Yeah, whereas my reality is still the village is my reality, although I have not been in the village for all these years. But the village was part of my intellectual formation, so my memories of what belongs to me is the village, although in my forthcoming memoir, I've talked about the loss of that particular village. But even the loss of that particular village is still a very strong reality in me, probably in a way that it's not for Mukoma until I allow him to read my memoir. I let you read it.
Yeah, and there's another example, which is, for example, in Dreams in a Time of War, you talk about, the loss of the village, but also in A Grain of Wheat, you talk about, the trenches that were being dug to keep the freedom fighters from being in contact with the villagers. So in his writing, that's very vivid, the trenches there, it's been dug. Whereas for me, when I was growing up, one of my memories is going to visit our grandmother and going through the same trenches, but they're not trenches now, they're covered up. They're actually sort of beautiful, to look at, because it's, it's almost like furrows of green, right? But yet also, I think that's something we share in common, the landscape. I mean, we may use it differently, but the idea of landscape as carrying memory, that's something also we share. It's a difference as well as a commonality.
I've been saying here, as a result, going back straight to the earlier question, about the passing on of, this tradition of imagine. I have, as I have 9 kids, I call them kids. Now, Mukoma is published. He has a second novel coming out, Sahara. This is my pride I get. But my daughter who follows him, Wanjiko, and she lives in Finland, her first novel has just been accepted by Simon & Schuster. Okay.
For an advance,
yeah, right. Yeah. And he and the brother who is older than him, called Dosho, although Dosho is older than him by a number of years, but they grew up together, kind of thing, so there's been a kind of sibling rivalry between them. So when Mukoma married a doctor, Dosho married a doctor. When Mukoma and his wife had a daughter called Nyambura, Dosho followed, and they had a daughter called Nyambura. When Dosho moved from Atlanta to New York, up part of New York, next to Connecticut, Mukoma moved, and Maureen moved from Ohio to actually the same side of, but on the Connecticut side. Yeah, so.
It sounds like you have a new family narrative here. Move the
Yes,
cowboy
yeah,
side.
right. So there is also, but also Dosho has a novel part accepted for next year. So many one. My wife, is writing a novel right now, so that's why she couldn't come with us. And they have a little rival here, in Thiong'o here. We're comparing notes. As we were having coffee here, and I was saying, actually I was bragging a little bit how at whatever age I had published 2 novels and whatever at some age, And then he reminded me quietly, oh, what about at 17? What did you publish? Of course I published nothing. But he said, okay, I published my first article in the Guardian. So he published last month.
A while ago.
Yeah, a while ago. So yeah. So the kind of it goes on in the family.
So there's obviously great pride in your children who are writing.
Oh yes, of course I'm very excited. I tell them they cannot beat me because when they win the Nobel Prize, I still brag.